tosses have thrown it out the door with their behaviour this week. They should be ashamed of themselves. They should absolutely look at themselves in the mirror and wonder what the have they been doing. They're hissing at us and calling us cheats in the Lord's long room, and they have the gall to say, talk to us about the spirit of cricket. Absolute bullshit.
There's a big appeal, it's hit him on the pad, he's out! Lions gone, New South Wales are 9 down! Onto Sydney Road, and it's hit a car! Oh, I think it's hit a car! What a way to bring up your 50!
All you want is to leave it all behind. Now there is a simple remedy to stay fit for all eternity.
I think I'd like to play the Olympics. I reckon that'd be cool. So we'll see how far I go in terms of long form cricket, but I'm going to play short form cricket for a while, I think, when I finish. And yeah, you never know. There's a lot of young, good kids that are smacking the ball out of the park.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Menners, and that was the great Stephen Smith speaking. Wow. Can you hear that? That's some loud thunder. So I'm recording this from Sydney, everybody, and this test missed the rain, but it's come eventually. But anyway, that was Stephen Smith talking after smacking 100 in the Big Bash, saying he wants to maybe play for Australia in the Olympics. Damien Watson is joining me. Damien, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Menners? Good to see that stormy weather that we often have in Melbourne has come up to Sydney. At least your water reserves aren't short.
Yeah, it's absolutely mental storm here, so you might get a bit of thunder and lightning in the background, add to the effects of some of Damien and I's hot cricket takes. But I'm doing really well. I had a fantastic few days, 3 days of cricket in a row. So Saturday afternoon, 6 scorchers at the SCG, Steve Smith with a big 100. Sunday, all day at North Sydney Oval for the beginning of the Women's Ashes. Great win for the Aussies led by Elisa Healy. Yeah. And then Monday night, Thunder versus the Scorchers at Homebush in the Sydney Showgrounds in Sydney. Big win for the Thunder. And 3 great games of cricket. So I'm really happy. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. We've got the Australian Open here, but we had the Melbourne Derby, of course, the other night too. And funnily enough, Menners, very interesting figures, the TV figures. It was on Sunday night, and admittedly the tennis had been affected by the rain. Fortunately, Marvel Stadium, you got the closed roof if you need it. The cricket actually outrated the tennis on night 1 of the Australian Open. So I thought that was interesting. Obviously, it reversed on night 2 because Kyrgios was playing. But I always look at that in a fascinating way, the comparison in the TV ratings between the tennis and the Big Bash League, just to give us an insight as to where they're at in the Australian sporting psyche.
When that came up in my news feed that the cricket had outrated the tennis, I knew you would bring it up on the show. So I'm glad you did.
It took about 3 minutes.
Yeah, well, the Big Bash is back. Cricket is back. I mean, there's no doubt that with crowds, record crowds at all the games, the Big Bash is resurgent. The atmosphere in the grounds at the Big Bash is very good. So I think we'll see some good competition between the Australian Open and the Big Bash for ratings, because there's not a lot of Australians to follow at the Australian Open that you'd expect to go deep into the tournament. So that'll help the Big Bash.
Well, you got De Minaur. I think a lot will hinge on him because Kyrgios obviously got eliminated pretty early on, which probably would have annoyed Channel 9 to a certain degree because they always rate well. But, yeah, it'd be interesting because maybe aside from Alcaraz, there's not too many tennis players these days, Metters, who are very flamboyant and really draw a huge amount of people in. It's very sort of straight down the line, which I suppose you have to be to succeed, but you don't see as many marquee players. Now, we're going through that phase in tennis, I think, where we're not seeing as many marquee players standing out like we had with the big 3 in the men's and with Serena and the women's for so long.
Yeah, and when would you see a tennis player play a reverse lap over where first slip would be for 6? It's just not going to happen. It's just going to be, regulation forehand. All right, so let's get into the cricket headlines brought to you by Piccolo Podcast. So much to talk about. Big Bash news, Women's Ashes news. But let's start with Australia announcing their Champions Trophy squad. And I'm not going to go through the whole squad name by name, but it's basically the same as the 2023 World Cup squad. There's just basically 3 changes. You've got Nathan Ellis in for Sean Abbott. You've got Matt Short in for David Warner. And you've got Aaron Hardy in for the injured Cameron Green. Apart from that, it's the 3 big quicks, the usual suspects in the team, Alex Carey and Josh Inglis both going. Only one spinner in Adam Zampa. And something that has drawn a little bit of consternation in the media, especially by friend of the show, Dan Cherney, is Marcus Stoinis being included in the squad at the age of 35, and he doesn't play domestic one-day cricket or have a state contract. I mean, we'll start with that one, Damien. Do you think that's strange that he'd be in the squad?
It is somewhat strange, but we know what he's capable of. So it's like, well, he can be a big hitter. I don't know if he's in the form of his life necessarily, but we know what he is capable of and that he can score, a big 150 or something like that. So found it a little bit odd, but maybe it's somewhat emblematic of the change in thinking and that maybe the domestic competitions locally, whether you like it or not, maybe not have the same level of influence anymore. I don't know, because the reality is we have far more competitions, far more other forms of cricket compared to the past.
Yeah, I think it is a bit strange. Well, I mean, I think overall this whole squad is very safe. Like George Bay and the selectors picked basically the same group of players that they've been using in all the World Cups recently, whether that's T20 or 50 over. And I think Marcus Stoinis is kind of emblematic of that. Maybe it was the time to take a punt and use his spot for a younger player who you're trying to get some experience before the next 50 over World Cup in 2 years. That's my comment on it. It just seems like a very sort of vanilla squad.
Well, Champions Trophy, isn't that a vanilla tournament, Menace?
Maybe.
You'll watch it, I know, but it'll be interesting to see how the Champions Trophy is received, whether it gets a lot of attention or not. Because we know with the T20 World Cup last year, you could argue in the middle of the footy season with, I guess, the time zone not necessarily being conducive to a big audience, it did get lost in the wash a bit. And I know Australia didn't perform overly well, but it'll be interesting to see how much influence or how much attention the Champions Trophy gets.
Definitely. I think it'll be All right, I'm back. I think I dropped out for a sec.
Yeah, that's all good. It's probably good to turn my light on as well. We'll just go from where we were talking.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting if Australia does well. I think there'll be some interest. It's a very quick tournament. The good thing about it is because it's a condensed tournament, every game means something. But so I think Stoinis, I'm not against his selection, but I think it's a little too safe for my liking. Now, something else struck me. George Bailey did a press conference. He was talking about Pat Cummins. Pat Cummins, after the Test series, it has been reported he's under an injury cloud with an ankle injury. It was also reported that he was going to have a scan. When Bailey did the press conference announcing the Champions Trophy squad, he was asked if he knew the results of the scan, and he said he hasn't spoken to Pat Cummins after the scan. He didn't want to bother him. What the hell is going on? This is a major tournament. Either we want to win it or we don't want to win it. If we want to win it, the selector needs to talk to the bloody captain and ask him if he's fit after he's had a scan. And then he goes, and then if Cummins is ruled out, then are they just going to appoint another captain at the last minute? You should have your captain thinking now about the tactics. They did this with the T20 World Cup last year. They announced Mitch Marsh right at the end, and he looked underdone. He didn't do a good job as captain, and we're doing the same thing this year. I cannot believe the chief selector wouldn't give Cummins a call and say, what did the scan say? Damien, that seems to me farcical.
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised as well. I mean, wouldn't you be in dialogue, given that's your job as a selector? You'd be in dialogue with the captain themselves. You didn't want to bother him. That was an interesting point of reasoning as well. Does it maybe indicate, men, there's something else at play or not? Or is he being genuine in saying that? Didn't want to bother him. Well, at the end of the day,
he was saying, he's just finished. Yeah, he was saying, he's had a long test series. He's got a baby coming. It would take, how long would that phone call take? 3 minutes? Hey, Pat, how was the scan? Oh, it was this, and this. Oh, thanks, mate. Just needed to know because we're about to announce the squad for this tournament and we want to make you captain. It's just crazy. They're very casual, this lot.
What about in the workplace, men, as if a boss calls you when you required or you're on call to take the call, you say, oh, well, I've got other stuff going on. Well, that wouldn't really wash with too many people, would it? To not even bother going to have that dialogue. You can always just say, I'll call you back.
Yeah, ridiculous. So Cummins was named skipper, but he's under an injury cloud. I think he'll be fine, but we'll see. Other stuff. So, for example, Stoinis is not there. I saw Sam Constas batting on Monday night at the showgrounds, made another great 50 in the Big Bash. He looks to me like an all-format superstar. Like, why isn't he being taken to the Champions Trophy? Like, he should be in our white ball squads as quick as possible. I did ask him if he's talked about it with George Bailey, and he said there's been no discussion around his white ball future, but there surely are better ways to use that 15th spot than Marcus Stoinis, another all-rounder, a young player. So I don't think it's a terrible squad, but I do think there's some odd selections.
Yes, it's an interesting one. Well, at the end of the day, though, this is the thing that interests me. You're talking about how it's probably a little bit safe. Wouldn't that be... Again, I don't really rate the Champions Trophy. We've got that many bloody tournaments these days. Wouldn't this be the type of tournament where you can make a few experiments?
Absolutely. This is where you might be thinking, okay, who's going to play in the World Cup in 2 years? Who are some of the players we want to see more of? Interestingly, Jack Fraser-McGurk was left out of the squad.
Hasn't been in great form, though.
No, and I think it was the right decision. But, he's a young player that I think maybe has to go away and do a lot of work. And we're also seeing the big difference between 20 over and 50 over cricket. Jake Fraser-McGurk might be good in 20 over cricket, but you need a different skill set in the 50 over game. Like, 30 off 20 balls is not going to win you a 50 over game, but it might be the sort of rocket, the jet fueled start you need in a T20 game. Other bits of cricket news around the national team this week. Jai Richardson, who was in the 5th test squad in the Border Gavaskar trophy, has elected to have shoulder surgery. So he's out for the rest of the season and won't be available until next summer. So that's a big blow. He's been blighted by shoulder injuries, and he put out a post on Twitter that he's just decided he needs to have this surgery to see if he can get it properly right, because he hasn't been bowling and throwing as well as he knows he can. So I think the right decision was made, but again, another setback for this young champion. Yeah,
absolutely. And I agree with you there. Right decision made. If you're not 100% fit, you may as well go back and recover. At the end of the day, we're coming into the second half of the season, so hopefully he get fit for next season. But certainly a player. I mean, he's 28 years of age, Menners. He's still got a bit to offer, I think. Hopefully we don't see the impact. And look, we've seen many players who've had shoulder surgery before, Shane Warne probably amongst them. And I know he's a different type of player, but hopefully it doesn't have any ill effects going forward. You want to make sure you get it right. You make sure the recovery's right. So fair enough.
Absolutely. Another interesting article, Adam Zampa spoke to News Corp about the fact that wrist spin is finding it really challenging to make it into Test cricket teams after Australia taking no wrist spinner to Sri Lanka. And look, there are a couple of leg spinners doing well around the world. I mean, you think of Afghanistan, especially. They've got a couple of leg spinners in their team, but apart from that, there are actually Pakistan until recently had a lot of leg spinners, but generally leg spin has fallen out of fashion a bit. I don't know why that is. I can see why Zampa was frustrated, but I also think for someone like Zampa, you've got to be playing a little bit more red ball cricket if you want to push your case.
Yeah, agree with that. I mean, you want to have that level of exposure because it's a different type of intensity, isn't it, Manners? And a different type of workload as well. I think you can't underestimate the fitness involved or the fitness that's required. So, yeah, agree with you there. But I don't know. Do you think we should be a bit more open to? I mean, I would have thought with the Shane Warne influence, we would have. Do you reckon you're surprised that we don't have more leg spinners within the system, considering a lot of this generation grew up with Shane Warne?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I think Shane Warne's old coach, Terry Jenner, used to say that this will inspire, thousands of kids to take up leg spin, but in the end, it won't make a difference. Basically, it won't make a difference at the top level because it's such a hard art to master. And I think it's just, at the time of Warne's peak, people would say, oh, this is so rare to have such a good leg spinner. And it kind of was. And it went through a bit of a resurgence, though, with Warne around, a couple of other leg spinners popped up, Stuart McGill and Anil Kumble, to name a couple. But, yeah, I think it just shows what a hard art it is. It's hard coming up the levels as a leg spinner. They're hard to skipper. It's hard at grade level and even shield level. They don't get a lot of opportunities. So, yeah, I'm not really surprised, actually. Other bits of cricket news. So Mitch Marsh. So I'm pissed off again. All right. There's a bit of mad manners tonight. So Mitch Marsh played one game for the Scorchers in the BBL. Hasn't played anymore, which I don't understand why he's resting, because he didn't play the last test at the Boyd Gavaskar Trophy. He's not going to Sri Lanka. So he could definitely afford to play a few BBL games. There are reports, though, that he has an injury. Pete Lawler reported that Mitch Marsh has a chronic ankle problem. So my point is, we were lied to the whole summer about Marsh by Cummins and McDonald. They kept saying he's right to bowl, even though the evidence suggested otherwise. And now we have the proof. He's not fit enough to even play in the BBL. So I'm so pissed off. Pissed off that they would lie to us like this. Just all this bullshit that they feed us and they expect us to just lap it up. I don't get it. Like, if he had this ankle problem all summer, come clean with it. But to just lie to us and say he can bowl, he clearly couldn't, and now he can't play the Big Bash because he's injured. It's absolute horseshit. And same sort of shenanigans. Cummins not talking to Bailey, lying to us about Mitch Marsh. There's some funky stuff going on, and I don't like it.
Why do you think they would do that? Is it a tactical thing? Is it a gamesmanship thing that we saw over the summer?
Well, they just like Marsh. Cummins wanted him in the team. They all want him in the team because he's a vibes guy. And they finally bit the bullet on the fifth test, and they realized, Bo Webster's a vibes guy too. You know why? Because he actually scores runs and can bowl.
Yeah, but it's all well and good to have a vibes guy, but if someone is injured, surely, I just don't understand.
I agree with you. Why are they lying to us?
Yeah, I don't understand why. If someone's not 100% fit, Manners, you got to have a good reason to have them in the team. And with Marsh's form in the lead up, etc., I didn't really understand. I think it was sort of spoken about, wasn't it, in the lead up to the Test series? Maybe they wanted to give him one more chance, but if he's not fit, he's not fit. So
exactly, you could say, look, he's got bowling limitations, or he can't, he can bowl but not that much. But we were just told, oh no, he's fit to bowl, and he wasn't. So there's another lie for the chalkboard. All right, a couple of other things around the national team. So in Australia, a team has been announced to play the English Lions. Interestingly, Curtis Patterson has been recalled into that team. There's no Marcus Harris, no Matt Renshaw, but the New South Wales left-hander that made a century in his last Test match, fell right out of form, but has been in superb form to start this season. He's back in the Oz A team. He's 31 years old. He's the right age to go back into that team. And I'd be looking for him to, say, replace a Marnus. If Marnus doesn't come good, that's a slot you could put him in, or maybe even up the top of the order. But good to see him back in the Oz A team. Quite the turnaround when, last summer he was out of the Blues team.
Yeah, I know. And he's spoken about his passion, maybe rekindling as well. And it's funny, isn't it, Menners? Sometimes when you release the pressure off yourself, because he wasn't in the conversation as much, maybe he just found a bit of freedom in the way he approached cricket and his mindset. And I think that sometimes translates. I think when you're always, we see it with a number of players, don't we? When they're on the fringe of selection or in the conversation with selection, as Patterson was for a period of time, it does affect in some cases your performance because you put that extra layer of pressure on yourself. Now that he's gone sort of, not full circle, but he's gone completely the other way in terms of a trough. Well, he's like, well, I'm out of the Blues team. It can't get much lower, let's be honest, in terms of what he's capable of. Maybe he just thought, you know what, stuff it, don't worry about putting pressure on myself, just go out and play cricket. And I think that might have been what's happened.
Yeah, like Khawaja when Khawaja thought he was all done at the top level. All right, final bit of news around national cricket, I guess you'd call it, international men's cricket. There's a report in the Daily Telegraph that the BCCI has decided that wives will be allowed to travel with the Indian players for no more than 2 weeks on tours lasting more than 6 weeks, and on shorter tours may be limited to 7 days. This is because there was a feeling maybe the wives and girlfriends distracted some of the Indian players on this last Australian tour. Also, in one of the articles that they cite, there was some thought around the fact that maybe if men are having too much sex the night before a game, that's not good for their performance on the pitch, not off the pitch, but on the pitch. Thoughts?
Well, a number of thoughts to this. I remember that it's not the first time people have said. I remember the Sydney Swans had a bonking ban many years ago before the grand final. That sort of made national news back in the 90s when they made the 96 grand final. I don't know, Metters. I mean, to me, that seems like a bit of a get out type of clause that they're trying to initiate here, or some kind of excuse. They're just surely, if you're a good enough team with a good enough culture, and sometimes it's beneficial having your wives and girlfriends there for that moral support and for that emotional support. I know there was a culture in Australian cricket for a long time, remember, Metters, where, wives and girlfriends, they weren't necessarily removed from the fold, but I think there was a bit of not a wall, but...
Alan Border famously banned them for a lot of the Ashes tour in '89. For example, I banned them until the last couple of Test matches. And I don't mind some small restrictions. So, for example, there's a school of thought that when you start a tour, for the first week or two, it's good to not have wives and girlfriends then, because you can sort of bond, you can get into the tour, and then they come. If it's a long tour, then they come for the rest of it. I think the fact that these professionals play so much cricket, you have to accept that they're going to need their wives and families around. Yeah. But I can also see the benefit to having shorter periods where you can just focus on being a team, because in the end, and it practically, for example, if your wives and girlfriends are on tour, when you finish, whether it's playing or training that day, you're going to go out and hang out with your wife or your girlfriend because they've just been there waiting for you. Or, you know what I mean? Like they're over there with you. They want to do stuff with you. Whereas if they're not there, you can go out with your teammates and have a bit of a laugh and bond. So I actually get where the BCCI is coming, but I think they've gone way too far. And I don't think you put a bonking ban either.
I have a job, right, like you do, and we work a certain amount of hours, sometimes longer than probably a cricketer does, let's be honest, in a certain day. But I still go back to my family, or, you have a girlfriend, etc. at the end of the day. And it's the same. sort of thing even when you're on tour. I just don't understand how that could be any different. Surely, okay, you dedicate a certain amount of time while you're on tour to playing and tactics, etc. But you got to have that outlet with members of your family, I think. Otherwise, for some people, I know, look, if you're younger and you're single, it's probably not really much of a concern. But as you get older and you have a partner, you want to have them there by your side. And I reckon it could have a detrimental effect the other way if they're there for such a short period of time or you set such stringent limitations. I just think you've got to be mature enough to be professional and recognise that, well, if that's a distracting factor, well, it shows how unprofessional you are.
Yes, I do think, though, that playing sport for your national team is different to our jobs, and it's a different situation. It's far more important. It's about national pride. This is what Justin Langer.
And is they're playing the sport, then is
but that's
playing sport doesn't save lives. You could. I know paramedics. Do you think Do you think they let the presence of a partner at the end of the day's work get the better of them? No.
Yeah, but the paramedics, aren't off touring India for 12, 7 or 8 weeks.
They're
away
still
from
doing
their
a job.
family. Yeah, I get it. I get it. I can just see that there's sometimes a little bit of forced bonding is good, and sometimes even adversity can bring people together.
Well, you can bond during working hours. Why do you have to go? Okay, you have team nights, that's fine. But dedicate a team night where it's just the team, as opposed to saying, wives and girlfriends are not allowed there for more than, outside of a 2-week period. I just think it's a bit ridiculous. I think it mollycoddles them to a degree. I mean, they're grown men, If they can't cope, either way in this situation, I just don't understand why you've got to have stringent rules like that. It just seems like it's mollycoddling. That's just my view.
All I'm saying is Ashes 89, 4-0, Ashes 93, 4-0, Ashes 97, 3-2, 2001, 4-1. And then we just let the wives in, and what happens? We don't win in England again.
No.
All right, we're going to take our first break, and then we'll be back to talk about the Women's Ashes. You are listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Manners. I have Damien Watson with me, and the Women's Ashes has begun. The first 2 games have been played. They were 2 one-day internationals, and there are 2 wins for Australia. So Australia are up 4 points to 0. They need 8 points to retain the Ashes, 10 points to win the series. So they've jumped to a 4-0 lead. Really good start for the Australians. And I guess first thing, Damien, the final game is the test match at the MCG, played under lights. If the English team don't get their act together, this test match could be an exhibition game with the Ashes already retained by Australia. That they only need to win 2 of the next 4 games.
Yeah, quite potentially. I think Michael Vaughan tweeted that out. He almost declared it, didn't he, Matters? I'm not sure if you saw that, basically saying, well, the big game at the MCG might just be a dead rubber. This is an former English captain in the men's already sort of giving up on his team in the women's. It's interesting, isn't it? I still think there'll be, you're right, you'd lose that element of the Ashes being on the line, but I think because it's such a rarity and it's the first time in a long time it's happened, there'll still be that attention. And it's a test match. It's the only test match of the series. So I think there'll still be the hype surrounding it. But you're right, maybe not to the same levels as if the Ashes were on the line. But, gee, England have had their chances, man. As they really should have won game 2. I thought they, for lack of a better term, shit the bed a bit.
Oh, it was terrible.
Some of the
Yeah, so in the first game, Australia restricted England to 204. This was at North Sydney Oval on Sunday. The game I was at, Ash Gardner took 3 for 19, which was included a 100th one-day international wicket. Then Australia chased it 6 down. Lisa Healy, top score, 70 off 78. Pretty convincing win for the Australians, no real wobbles. And then in the second game, Australia were sensationally bowled out for 180 after getting off to a pretty good start. Lise Perry was top score with 60 for Australia. And then I think most people thought, England will probably chase this down. Well, they collapsed to be all out for 159. Alana King took 4 for 25, a couple of absolutely perfect leg spin deliveries. to get some wickets in that match. So Australia won both of those games. And you're right, in both games, a lot of the English top order have got starts and then got out with fairly soft dismissals. In the first game, there was a couple of sweeps into the outfield where they were caught. In the second game, just some leading edges, just soft dismissals that, I don't know, England came here in pretty good form, but they just haven't shown up yet. The only thing I would say is Australia went 6 points up in the last Ashes. They won the test match, won the first one-day international, I think it was, and then it ended up being 8-all. So England got 8 of the next 10 points and almost stole the series. So I wouldn't completely rule out an English comeback, but they've looked sloppy so far, really sloppy.
You're right. I think it's interesting though. It's in situations where they seem to be in control and then they just let the door in for Australia. It's just that lack of poise and polish. But one thing I would say for them is, well, at least they've got themselves in winning situations. So they haven't been absolutely blown out of the water in the first 2 games. They've just got to get those 1%ers right and their composure right, Menners. I mean, some of the shot selections where they didn't need to be played on multiple occasions during the innings the other day was in game 2 was just pretty ordinary and just from experienced players as well, just that lack of game awareness. So I think if they can get that right, they're actually playing. I mean, both sides have made errors, but they're competitive enough to win matches.
Yeah, well, you talk about game awareness. I think the biggest example of how they've been off the game is in that second game. They were 9 down, and Amy Jones, the English wicketkeeper, was batting very well, and England had an outside chance of getting the runs. I think they needed sort of 20 off 13 or something, and it was the last ball of the 18th over, and it was a free hit because the ball before had been a no ball. Amy Jones is on strike, the batter. At the other end, you've got the number 11. She hits the ball into the outfield and should have been a single to the other end to keep strike for the next over. Lost track of the balls, so thought there was another ball in the over, didn't run. And then the number 11 was on strike for the first ball of the next over, and I think was out first or second ball that over. Lauren Bell. So just such simple game awareness that, look, I still think Australia probably would have won that game, but, you know, you got to give yourself a chance. You need 18 off 12 balls. We've seen it before. You know, once you put the pressure back onto the bowlers, you never know what can happen. So that just displays, you know, how poor they've been with their game awareness. Positives, though. Huge crowd at North Sydney Oval. It was sold out. There was
what's a sellout at North Sydney Oval though? Because I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I think it's a great result as well. But it's a small ground. What was the crowd?
It was 6,200, I think. So a good crowd though. The fact that they sold it out. Junction Oval on Tuesday, there was just under 3,000 there at Junction Oval. Now, Damien, I don't know Junction Oval very well, but there's not a lot of seating there, is there? No. Like 3,000 there is pretty good.
Yeah, it is, because technically, WBBL, they tend to get between 1,000 and 2,000 for some of the bigger games, and it's not full, let's be honest, for some of those matches. There's limited seating because I think they're redeveloping one of the stands there, the old stands, and also they've got the hill area where you can stand. Look, it was a beautiful day. Having said that, a lot of people are back at work, and the Australian Open's on as well, so there was a fair bit to compete with. But I've been impressed with the attention. They've marketed it to the nth degree, Cricket Australia. So far, I think it's worked reasonably well. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the MCG test. I've been having this discussion with a few people in radio as well as to what sort of crowd they might get. The benefit will be that it's after the Australian Open. It's after the Big Bash. I know the Aussie men's team are in action at this, and it's a shame that it's clashing with the first test of the Sri Lanka series for the men. Having said that, if the test match is over inside 4 days in the men's, then you get a tight finish with the women's test match. It might, and it's not really competing against much, maybe aside from Married at First Sight, Premier Menners.
I know you love that. Well, the other thing is they're playing the first of the T20 matches in the Ashes at the SCG on Monday night.
Will it get a big crowd, do you reckon?
Well, that's, I think, will give us an indication of what they
Yeah.
could get. We were talking about it at North Sydney Oval. Well, they got 6,000 here Monday night at the SCG T20 game. I think they could get between 10 and 15,000. I guess, you bring up it clashing with the men's Sri Lankan tour. I do think there's a disappointment that, say, these one-day internationals, like the one on Tuesday at Junction Oval, ideally, that should have been played at a ground with lights and played in prime time, but they don't want it to clash with the Big Bash. So the women have kind of shunted to an all-day game at the Junction Oval when actually, if the women were playing on free-to-air in prime time on Channel 7, I think it'd rate really well, but because of the Big Bash, they just can't do it.
Yeah, that and it's up against the Australian Open as well, Benners. It's a lot of competition at night time, so they really had no choice unless they wanted to play these matches in February.
Not everyone likes tennis, though. Cricket's much more popular.
But tennis does but tennis does rate very well. It'll be interesting to see what happens throughout the rest of this tournament. But traditionally, tennis rates pretty well because it does attract, the idle sports follower when the Australian Open is on. But it was just one of those situations where it's a stacked schedule. But the MCG will be interesting in that it is somewhat of a window because we haven't really got into the footy yet in either code, and we're finished the Big Bash and we've finished the tennis by that point. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be on free to wear. That's the advantage it has over the Australia v Sri Lanka first test. Have they sorted out that TV rights thing, by the way? Wasn't there talk that Sri Lanka cricket and Fox haven't sorted things out yet? So what happens? I don't think realistically there'll be a black hole, but because for Sri Lanka cricket, having some deal is better than nothing. Let's be honest.
Yes.
You've got to have some money.
Yeah, I don't know. There's been no reports yet, and I wonder if the sale of Fox has put a spanner in the works. Also, Gideon Haigh reported that ABC are doing radio commentary for the series, but they're going to do it off the television.
Well, SEM, my station, would have had a monopoly over everything if that hadn't been the case. So there you go.
But I think SEN actually going. My understanding is Adam Collins.
Correct. Adam Collins of the team.
My good friend Adam Collins, friend of the show. Anyway, so I actually saw the final word live last week. So it was in Sydney. It was Jeff Lemon and his co-host Adam, and they had Simon Kadich and Glenn Maxwell. It was very good. Very good.
Oh, fantastic. Just on what's your estimate for the crowd at the MCG, Menners? I know we'll get it. We'll play this game.
I'm going to tell you after Monday. After Monday, the SCG, I think it'll give me an idea of the interest because, as I said, I'm just such in a cricket bubble. I just think everyone should be there. So, women's Ashes, Australia are up 4-0. They play a huge game on Friday in Hobart. I think the third one-day international. England just cannot afford to drop that. So a huge game there.
I should mention Alana King, good on her as well, Menners. I know we've got obviously other things to talk about, but good on her because I think a lot of people, she's always sort of had that, and she could still be a little bit more consistent in the way that she plays and the way she performs, but she was sensational. The first two games, she's been pretty good. Bowled at absolute peach as well at the Junction Oval, almost Warney-esque. Because a lot of people, there's some in the fan base who think maybe Amanda Jade Wellington deserves that spot, and you could make a very good argument that she should, based on her record. There's always been a bit of a toing and froing as to who gets that spot. So good on her, I guess, Alana King, for putting her name up in lights in that respect. Because I reckon she would have felt that pressure externally as to whether she belongs in the team. So good on her.
Well, that ball she bowled to Danny White was a Shane Warne special. I mean, that would have got a lot of batters out, drifted in, spun away. White had no idea, played down the wrong line. It was a bit like when Mike Gadding was out all those years ago, just mystified with the amount of revolutions on the ball. So great stuff. Women's Ashes continues. Next time we record, I will have been at the first T20, so lots to talk about. Just continuing with the news. So the pitch ratings were released by the ICC for Australian pitches during the Border Gavaskar Trophy. Now, for those that aren't aware of how pitches are rated, there are 4 ratings by the ICC: very good, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, and unfit. So 4 of the 5 pitches this year for Australia in the Test summer were rated as very good. 1 was rated as satisfactory, and that was the Sydney Cricket Ground. So it didn't receive any demerit points. It still received a satisfactory rating. But I imagine this will be a bit of a kick up the bum for the SCG. For all 4 other grounds to get very good and for the SCG to be behind them all, it's a bit of a blight on the mighty grounds record.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think ultimately, would there be any changes in terms of staffing as a result? Not that I want to call for anyone's head necessarily, but at the end of the day, there's got to be a review on performance, like any aspect of any organisation matters. Do you think that this sort of publicity would cause heads to roll in that respect?
I hope not, because I think part of pitch preparation is experience. Now, my understanding is that they've got a new curator looking after the wicket recently. So there's a big team that looks after the ground, but they've sort of got someone who they're trying to put in charge. Yeah, and just get the wicket right. What's frustrating is the Big Bash game on Saturday I went to, fantastic wicket. Beautiful wicket. Looked great, played great. Like if you'd started the test with that wicket, it would have been fine because it would have worn a bit. So I imagine by day 4 and 5, there might have been a bit of turn. It might have been a bit dusty. So they're not far off getting it right. And I just hope they're spending the time and that they're really trying to learn from every pitch, because you've got to get the test pitch right. Or, the Big Bash doesn't matter. They all matter, but the one thing you've got to get right every year if you're the SCG is the test pitch. And, they haven't quite nailed it recently.
Well, then again, could be worse, man, as you could have that Marvel Stadium surface after the uni graduation or the Geelong, Geelong in general.
Oh, yeah, Marvel Stadium not looking good. All right, speaking of the Big Bash, we'll take our final break, then we'll be back to talk about everything that's been happening in the BBL. Welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Manners. I'm with Damien Watson. And for those wondering where Daniel Beswick is, he is in Malaysia at the Under-19 Women's World Cup. He's off there commentating and covering that for the ICC. So, he'll be back soon. I actually saw Daniel at the SCG test, and it was the first time I'd seen him in about 2 or 3 years after all the podcasts we've done online. Anyway, we're recording this podcast on Wednesday night, so I want to talk about the Big Bash. I'll keep it fairly general, though, because obviously there'll be a lot of results between now and when you're listening. But the makeup of the finals is not completely known, but we do know 3 of the 4 teams that have qualified. So the Hurricanes have qualified, and both Sydney teams have qualified for the Big Bash finals. So that's great for me to have the Thunder and the Sixers there. And it's interesting, you talk about the Melbourne teams and splitting management there. A couple of years ago in Sydney, they went away from a unified model and they put Trent Copeland in charge of the Thunder and Rachel Haynes in charge of the Sixers. And we're actually seeing better results for the Thunder. The Sixers have always done well, but Copeland's really got the Thunder moving. And I think you need people to fight for you, because I know, because I work there a lot, Cricket New South Wales is a huge organisation. And if you're the Thunder or the Sixers men's team, it's not that you can get forgotten about, but your priorities might not rise to the surface. There's so many other priorities for Cricket New South Wales. They've got a huge remit. So you need someone like a Trent Copeland going, hey, do not forget about us. This is what we need. So I think it's really good what they've done.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting. You're right. You want to build the franchise as well, because I think there's still probably that element of the public that sort of think, this is a bit gimmicky to a degree. I mean, they'll watch the T20 cricket, but there's not that absolute heartwarming feeling to a particular team, Manners. So I think it's taken a while for that to shake off, and maybe still that mud sticks to it to a degree, because it doesn't have the prestige of a state team or national team that you're representing. So You're
I think
right.
I think you're wrong on that.
No, but I think for a long time it was felt that way. Not too many people had. I'm talking mainly in Melbourne and Sydney because you have 2 teams per city. I think you have that state-based. You look at the Scorchers and their success
you're right.
crowds. But I'm probably exclusively talking about Melbourne and Sydney.
Yeah.
I get the feeling maybe it's a Melbourne feeling, but there's the diehards out there who are attached to a team, but the vast majority go to watch the cricket as opposed to actually follow their team. And sometimes what I'm saying is that can filter into the organisation and you become less of a priority. So if you have someone in charge of a particular team representing that franchise, it gives a bit of credibility to the franchise itself.
Absolutely. And I guess a big difference as well is like the Thunder and the Sixers are geographically a long way apart. So there is actually a reason to support each team. Like if you live out west, driving to the SCG is a long way. You can go out and see the Thunder play. Yeah. It's really close. It's not the same in Melbourne. Like Marvel Stadium and the MCG are both in the city. So there's no reason to have an affinity with each side. Whereas, there is a bit of a divide east and west in Sydney, which they can play off. So
correct.
Anyway, so lots of news in the Big Bash. A couple of things though. This is the time of the tournament when a lot of overseas players leave. So they head to the ILT20 or the SAT20. So I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of overseas players have left now. You just turn on and you go, oh, why aren't they there? Oh, that's right. They've gone to play in another tournament. And then also when we hit the finals, all the test players go again. Yeah. So, it happens every year, but it is very strange for a competition to have such different teams in the finals than in the preliminary rounds. And look, I think it takes away from the competition's integrity. I don't think it's debilitating, but I think it stops it from having the intensity of some other T20 competition because you get to the finals and you're like, oh, where are all the stars?
Well, purely and simply, matters. It comes down to money. That's the bottom line. And also an element of prestige. There's still that prestige of playing for Australia, and that's going to take precedence. So if you have 2 separate reasons as to why players are leaving and they're going to take precedence, well, that's just the way it is. Unless they change it on the calendar, which I don't think realistically they are going to do that because you want to target the school holiday audience, matters. That's why we'll be getting reasonable crowds.
So, for example, say in the AFL, the AFL, for the finals, they just went, each player lost 2 good players because they went to go and play in another league. Like you'd be looking at the AFL finals going, what the hell? Like,
agreed.
So,
I guess, but when you look at and it comes down to the mainstream fan that is not a cricket nuffy like you or I, Menners, at the end of the day, they go for the experience and to watch players hit sixes. I mean, there is that marquee status that does make a difference when you have marquee players in, and we saw that maybe 10 years ago in the Big Bash or just over. And it does draw bigger crowds. There's no doubt that makes a difference. But there is that pocket of people that at the end of the day don't attach to the players. They attach to the experience and the game itself.
Oh, that's true. And so, I go to so many Big Bash games. I talk to a lot of people. There are definitely people there that just go to see like the Thunder or the Sixers because of where they live. There are definitely people who go there just for a good time. And there are definitely people who go there who have no idea where their team is on the ladder. They're just like, this will be a fun night. So I do get that. And I think that's fine. But when I look at it as a pure competition, I think.
Oh, agreed.
You're just missing that sizzle. The only thing that's been good this year is, most of Australian white ball players have been available.
Yeah.
So that has been good. There's been no conflicting white ball games. All right. Other news. Daniel Sams is out for the season now. It has been confirmed. So listeners might remember he had that horrible collision with Cameron Bancroft. He had severe concussion. Also, he's got a side strain. So he's now out of the rest of the season. So a big loss for the Sydney Thunder because he's a genuine match winner. And then last Saturday, the game I spoke about, on Saturday, the game I went to, but then afterwards the Strikers played as well. And that was an incredible day because it was the first time in the Big Bash we've had 200s in the day, Steve Smith and Matt Short. Steve Smith hit his 3rd Big Bash century in just 32 matches. He now has the most Big Bash hundreds with Ben McDermott, who has played 100 matches, so he's equaled him in about a third as many games. Smith made 121 off 64 balls. An incredible innings. He was reverse lapping. He was just playing beautifully. And it made me think, should Steve Smith be back in our T20 side, and should he open? I think they should drop Mitch Marsh. They should make Steve Smith captain, and he should open in 50 over and 20 over cricket. And I've only been saying it since the 2015 World Cup. Good friend of the show, Sam, he always listens. He'll know I've been saying this. And he keeps proving that at the top of the order in white ball cricket, Smith is a master.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see why he should be deterred in any way. His record speaks for itself, and I think there's an element of him that loves playing in the Big Bash, though, Menners, because there's not that inherent pressure that comes with playing. And I think it does make a difference when you're regularly playing Test cricket, and that scrutiny is always there on every single innings. It's not the same scrutiny really when it comes to Big Bash form. You can just go out, play. If you do have a run, I mean, in his situation, if he has a run of a few games where there's a run of outs, not too many people are going to speak about it, are they?
No, you're right. But he is phenomenal at the top of the order, and I'd love to see him back in that Australian side. I know at times it seems like he doesn't have the power game, but I just think the way our team's going, his tactical nous would be so valuable. And with the T20 World Cup in next year in 2026 on the subcontinent, why not? But I just want to talk about that day on Saturday. So the Sixers made their highest score in the BBL, 220 for 3. On the same day, the Strikers made 5 for 251, which is only the second time a men's team has crossed 250 in a T20 game in Australia. So it was a huge day. They equaled the most number of sixes in that Strikers Heat game. So if you were watching on Saturday, you got some primetime entertainment. And then on Sunday night, the Stars were playing the Renegades in the derby. The Stars were 7 for 75 until Glenn Maxwell went berserk. He hit 90 off 52 deliveries. He put on 81 with Usama Mir. Usama Mir scored 0 in that partnership of 81. Yeah. And they took the score from 7 for 75 to 8 for 156. And in the end, the Stars won the game by 42 runs. That's after being 7 for 75, which means the Stars won 4 in a row. That's unbelievable from a team that can't win a game. They were 0 and 5. They've won their last 4 and now have an outside chance of making the finals if they can win their last game. So, I mean, that Sunday night was box office. I mean, that was the night that outrated the tennis.
Correct.
Maxwell going berserk, win for the Stars, had it all. Like, this Big Bash is pumping.
I agree. Even Novak Djokovic was lured there, Menners. He didn't even watch the night one of the Australian Open, one of the greatest of all time. He wanted to see Glenn Maxwell hitting lap shots and just absolutely hitting it out of the park. So that shows you when you have a marquee player like that doing what he does best, what sort of impact that has on the competition. And you're right. I think it is pumping in the sense that we've got decent crowds. I think they had about 27,000 at the Adelaide Oval, which isn't their peak or anything. New Year's Eve's their big game, I guess, their big home game. But they had a good crowd at Marvel Stadium. So the interest certainly is there. Glenn Maxwell. You do wonder as well, Menners. It always comes up when he plays an innings like that. You know, whether he should get more of a go with the Australian side, whether he comes into the Test team in any way. Do you think realistically that will ever happen, given he's been stumped that many times?
Unfortunately, I think he's missed the boat. But, I mean, I said it when we were bagging Mitch Marsh this summer. I mean, you know, a guy like that's got 46, 47 tests and Maxwell's got 7. He just hasn't been ever looked after properly. He's also been his own worst enemy at times. He's sort of a rocks or diamonds player. But I do think he needed to be better managed. And unfortunately, I think he's missed the boat. But it's such a shame because you can't tell me he's not one of the most talented batters in the country. It's just, it's indisputable that he's a more talented batter than Mitch Marsh. It's indisputable. And Marsh got all these opportunities. So, yeah, I agree. But I don't think he'll ever get another game. Just while we're sticking with the Big Bash, I said last week that Dan Christian had come out of retirement to play for the Sydney Thunder.
Yeah.
So great story. He was playing against the Brisbane Heat. He came in and scored 23 not out of 15 and took 1 for 25 off 4 overs. So he still got it. His team lost, though. I think he played one more game and then was put back on the bench as the assistant coach. But you know what's come out after that? He's unretired. Dan Christian has said he's available to play now. So he's literally unretired. And I heard a rumor that the Sixers want the retirement gift back that they gave him when he retired.
What was that, a gold watch?
I don't know, but he came out of retirement and then played for their rival. So I don't think they're happy.
Well, just if he retires again, just don't give him a gift. Leave the gift that he had originally, So that's just semantics, really. But it shows you, Manners, when sometimes when a player gets that taste of it back, it's amazing when they're out of it for a little bit. They want to come back in. Apparently
he'd been thinking about it for a while,
right.
It's
not a fleeting thing. Yeah.
No, I think he probably just thinks he's still good enough, and he probably is, and probably wants to earn some sweet cash. Anyway, that is all the cricket news. The Big Bash continues. We'll get the finalists locked in by the end of the week, and then next week will be finals, culminating in the grand final on Australia Day.
I think it's the holiday, isn't it? The Monday holiday.
Yes, that's right. So it's the day after Australia Day. It's the public holiday on the 27th. So let's see how the rest of the Big Bash goes. I'm really excited because with 2 Sydney teams in the finals, I'm going to get some home finals in Sydney, which is good. Probably, well, at least 1 or 2, you would imagine. Maybe 3, I could have a grand final. All right, let's get into Can't Let It Go. That little bit of cricket news you just can't let go through to the keeper. Damien, what have you got for us?
Yeah, so the other competition, it probably gets lost in the wash a bit because of the women's Ashes, but there's the WNCL resuming, which is a 50-over format for the women's. And I noticed, Menners, the ACT Meteors, I went up there a couple of times to Canberra to cover and commentate their games back in the day, so I have a bit of a soft spot for them, even though they're not my state or territory. And look, they've been beaten from pillar to post for quite a while, getting smashed in games, but they were 2 from 2 in their recent games against Victoria, who actually had a pretty good start to the WNCL season, and they have good players like Meg Lanning, who's playing in that Victorian team at the moment, like Sophie Day, like Nicole Fulton, Tess Flintoff, very, very good players, and the ACT have beaten them twice, which has been a big surprise because it looked like this season they weren't going to win a game. Olivia Porter, who's originally from your neck of the woods up there in Sydney, Manners, she was fantastic in the second of the 2 games, and I think she made an unbeaten 80. So good on the Meteors. They're not relying on just Katie Mack to make runs. They still need to make bigger scores, but their bowling with Holly Furling there, I suppose, is lifted. They probably still need to improve in the batting department, but they claim a couple of wins against the grain, so just had to put that in there.
No, I like it. I did see that your lot got smashed a couple of times by the ACT. Yeah. My can't let it go is that there's a report in the last week that there was a letter by a number of UK MPs that was given to the England and Wales Cricket Board to consider boycotting their match in the upcoming Champions Trophy against Afghanistan. This was obviously due to the way the Taliban have come down heavily on women's sport in Afghanistan, and they're putting a lot of restrictions on education for women in Afghanistan. So UK MPs, have basically made their feelings clear to the ECB. The ECB has responded by saying, look, this is a matter for the ICC, and the UK's Prime Minister has urged the ICC to act and give some, actually take action against this. And look, I think this is really good that we're starting to see some movement against playing against Afghanistan. Australia's stance has always been quite befuddling that they will play them in major competitions but won't play them bilaterally. I can see some sense in it, but again, the ICC needs to act now. Afghanistan should not be allowed to play in international tournaments. Any argument to the contrary is, in my opinion, incorrect. People say to me, it's good for people there to see the national team playing. In the end, you are allowing a team to play for a country that is being ruled by the Taliban, who are an oppressive, diabolical regime. and the ICC needs to act. So I'm glad that UK MPs have started to push. Hopefully, this is the signal for more governments around the world to put pressure on the ICC because action needs to be taken.
Yeah, well said, Menners. And yeah, I get, it's a good story for Afghanistan to be around, but at the end of the day, and I know people say, sport and politics shouldn't mix, but, you got to do what's right.
Absolutely. All right, that was Can't Let It Go. And that was Cricket Unfiltered for this week. Damien, thanks for joining me. We'll have to work out next week depending on the Big Bash finals, but it's been great to chat. A lot of news, surprisingly.
Surprisingly, we're in the middle of cricket season, Menners. So, yes, it's been good to chat and looking forward to the tail end of the Big Bash season. It'll be good to see some Melbourne representation for once, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'd like to see the Stars win and get into the finals. I mean, that'd be a great story to come back from 0-5. I mean, we wrote them off in this podcast. I'd like to see the Thunder do. I'd like to see the Thunder do well. Be interesting if the Big Bash Grand Final is in Hobart. I don't think that is the most ideal location for a Grand Final in Hobart, and I've also heard rumours that there's actually a manpower shortage. So you're saying the Grand Final is on the 27th. The 27th is a public holiday. There is actually fears that they will struggle to get staff to be there. I think it's Bloodston Arena or whatever it's
Ninja
called.
Stadium, I think
Ninja
it's called.
Stadium, that's right. Ninja Stadium, much better name. That they might have to fly in staff from the mainland to staff out Ninja Stadium.
Well, that's even more costly than just trying. Why don't you get some hospitality experts from within and pay them a little bit more as contractors rather than flying in people from the mainland?
I know, but they're just saying they might not have the staff. It's a public holiday. So anyway, hopefully it's in Sydney.
Before we finish, I should give a shout out to the Scorchers fans out there because they're 7th on the table, second last. Still getting big crowds. It shows you how parochial they are, though, Menners. They get bigger crowds to the Scorchers games than when Australia play. It's a weird, but good on them, but it's a very weird, feeling in WA. Very, very parochial.
So I saw them lose both games in Sydney against the Sixers and the Thunder, and I was talking to Ash Agar after the loss at the Thunder, and he said, we just hate losing. This has not been a good trip to Sydney for us. Like, we are pissed off. Like, the Scorchers are, they're used to taking all before them and being there or thereabouts. It's not happened. Damien, where can the listeners catch up with you? Where are you on Twitter?
At Damo_Watts on Twitter.
Doing any radio this weekend?
No, probably more racing. I did NFL on the weekend, Menners, wildcard weekend, so last weekend, and we're building up towards the Super Bowl.
You don't commentate on it, do you?
Not commentary, just a bit of hosting. But
and you take the overseas feed or something?
Yeah, that's right. And I don't have a lot in terms of, skin in the game because I'm a Carolina Panthers fan and we're rubbish. So yeah.
All right, listeners. Well, thanks for tuning in for the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. Remember, you can find us on YouTube, on all podcast apps. We're on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, even though it's going to get banned in the States. Don't forget there's an ad-free version of the show on Patreon if you're sick of all the ads. And
ask us some questions as well. Yes.
Actually, yeah, I've got a lot. Actually, there's a fair bit of feedback that we'll get to soon when there's a bit less news. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Bye-bye.